Welcome everyone to EKS&H Consulting's workshop on predictive analytics as a driver to ROI in higher education. My name is Shannon Beasley and I am the training lead at EKS&H Consulting and will be your host for today's webinar. In today's workshop we will cover predictive analytics and its application in higher learning, a case study from Wichita State University, and we will wrap up today's workshop with a question and answer session. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I'd like to introduce Mike Tagtoe, Director of Sales at EKS&H Consulting. Mike?
Thank you, Shannon. Wanted to mention a couple of things real quick before we jump into the presentation. First of all, EKS&H, we're an IBM Premier Business Partner, and we've done over 30 higher ed implementations of business analytics thus far. Also, wanted to mention that this workshop is our first in a series of five higher education workshops. So today's topic is predictive analytics, of course, and next month on October 23rd we're going to be doing a workshop on budgeting and planning in higher education. And then we're going to do monthly workshops, so following budgeting and planning is business analytics, and then we're going to do data integration and data cleansing, and finally we're going to do demystifying Banner. So be looking for invitations for those workshops over the next couple weeks and months. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have two outstanding speakers. The first one is Dr. David Wright. Dr. Wright is an Associate Vice President for Academic Data Systems and the Chief Data Officer at Wichita State University. And he's successfully implemented SPSS to drive recruitment, retention, and information, and he's going to talk to you more about that today. But first, John Murphy, who's a senior consultant in our business analytics practice, is going to give you an overview of predictive analytics and how it's used in higher education. John?
Thanks, Mike. Some of you may already be familiar with predictive analytics. For those who are not, I'll provide a brief description. Predictive analytics encompasses a variety of techniques, including statistics, data mining, and game theory, to analyze large amounts of data and discover new patterns and relationships that can be used to make predictions on future behavior or events. By learning from the past, we can make better predictions about the future. We'll touch on some of the areas that can benefit from predictive analytics within higher education. Recruiting, it's managing the funnel from initial contact through matriculation and beyond. Retention, student success overall and at the course level. Advancement, alumni engagement and fundraising. Budgeting and planning, as an example, forecasting enrollment. So let's talk a little bit more about the area of recruiting. What if we could identify those recruits that are more or less likely to apply, attend, and ultimately graduate? Identify the high schools and post-secondary institutions that are more or less likely to yield recruits that apply, matriculate, and graduate. And understand how likelihood to matriculate is influenced by financial aid package for different segments of recruits. For example, in-state versus out-of-state students. Focusing financial aid offers on those whose decision to attend is most likely contingent on their aid package. In the area of retention, what if we could more accurately and earlier identify at-risk students in time to direct intervention efforts to influence student success? Identifying at-risk students before they set foot on campus and throughout their college careers. Identifying their attrition risk, who's likely to drop out or transfer, as well as who's at risk of a bad or failing grade based upon the student, their history, and the course, before they even register for the course or early in the semester. In the area of advancement, what if we knew which alumni are likely to give? What amounts would they be likely to give if asked? Via which channel, for example, phone, mail, or email, would they prefer to be contacted? And then when or with what frequency are they most likely to be receptive to requests? And closely related to advancement alumni relations, what if we knew who's likely to join the Alumni Association, who's likely or unlikely to renew their Alumni Association membership, to become a life member, to attend homecoming or reunion, and which alumni have high or low affinity to the organization. In the area of budgeting and planning, what if we could more accurately and earlier forecast enrollment in time to take action to influence enrollment numbers, or forecast future student counts by major, or forecast future demand at the course level, making this information available to feed resource planning and staffing plans. Now I'm going to turn over to Dr. Wright, who will present on the application of predictive analytics at Wichita State University. He's going to cover their work around the areas of recruiting, retention, and enrollment forecasting. Dr. Wright?
Thank you, John. Let me start by providing some context for our university and the efforts that we've done in predictive analytics. Wichita State University is an urban campus. We're residing in the city of Wichita, the largest city within the state of Kansas. We are a doctoral research intensive institution with an enrollment of approximately 15,000 students per term. In terms of our information systems, we are an Aleutian banner school running their student, finance, financial aid, and their HR modules. The university started aggressively using predictive analytics back in 2008 to address the need for evidence-based decision-making among our administrative and our operational offices. IBM SPSS Statistics, Modeler, and Cognos have played a major role in providing a robust and comprehensive data system that provides for us information to all branches of the university. Over the years, we've deployed analytics in numerous areas, including recruitment, retention, budgeting, as well as information reporting. To save time today, I'll concentrate just on the student recruitment activities and end by briefly highlighting some of our other areas. In terms of recruitment, in order to effectively recruit, we need to identify both individuals as well as entities. Things such as institutions, geographic areas, all in terms of their application yields. That means we'll need to have both individual and structural level approaches. While the modeling process involves different underlying algorithms and techniques, both ultimately will produce scores, which we then can use to be able to target recruitment in order to increase yield and lower our costs, thus increasing our return on investment. Regardless of the approach or the algorithm, we're going to need data to train scoring models in order to identify homogeneous population groups and to determine robust predictors for each. We use IBM SPSS Statistics and Modeler to process the last 5 years of our student data nightly. In these automated nightly jobs, scoring is developed for individual students, institutions, and geographic locations, and then refreshed daily as our population changes continuously. The scores are then loaded into our banner system on a daily basis, as well as our business intelligence and predictive modeling system warehouse. Then we can use those for recruitment, revising, or identifying risk. Let's turn our attention to that individual model I spoke of. The population target for this score would be the in-state high school seniors that we have. While they only make up approximately half of our undergraduate applications, our undergraduate admission office spends a considerable amount of time and money recruiting this group. As we all know, prospect data is oftentimes very limited in what we can use for predictive modeling, but we have successfully laid out several predictors that will allow us to identify which high school senior prospects are likely to make application, thus deserving more recruitment resources. The model includes the sex of the student, whether they are an underrepresented minority, their college major of choice, or whether they are an undecided major, their primary source of contact. It might be a high school visit, for example, or a campus fair, as well as their geographic location. Using a series of logistic regression algorithms, we create a probability estimate of them moving from a recruit to that of an applicant. This score is assigned to the student and uploaded into our banner system daily. The score is refreshed nightly and may change due to changes in the population, as well as changes in the data that we have on the student. This allows us to have near real-time data on the student for deploying in recruitment at any time. In addition, we have other scores that we create, for example, the probability that someone may move from an applicant to an admit student and from an admit to that of an enrollment probability. The next slide allows us to be able to look at a random set of prospects from the database. And as you can see from the expanded view of the RTAP scores, we can see that the first prospect here has a 6.75% probability of becoming an applicant, whereas the second student has a 72.76 probability. With these scores, admissions offices can more effectively target prospects that have a high probability of coming to WSU. They can elect, for example, to create breakpoints within that RTAP score range to allocate resources for better yield. As an example, they may elect to target only students who have a 30% or higher probability of coming to our school. Or they may decide that those who are 70% or higher will likely come anyway without aggressive recruiting, and then send them only a letter, whereas those between 30 and 70% will receive a letter as well as a phone call, and those under 30% receive only an email. The RTAP score, again refreshed daily, allows them to be able to conduct recruitment campaigns that will cost less and generate more yield than what our previous models did. And of course, models are something that we continually have to evaluate to make sure that they're hitting the performance that we need, especially since our population is always changing, the available data on students are continuously being updated, and new data dimensions become available. So we evaluate our models for performance weekly. This slide provides metrics on our current RTAP score that we've been discussing and compares it to two previous models that were used before we began to deploy analytics. In the past, we paid and employed outside vendors to perform our scoring. It was largely a manual process where we either sent them a data file of our students or we had to manually execute their software based on an estimated model they gave us. While these vendors normally produced industry standard yields, they lacked an understanding of our institution-specific business practices, and were always out of date since it was always a file that was uploaded rather than real-time data. With SPSS, we have real-time scoring that is based on current business practices under the direction of those who know the admission data the best, us. It's not surprising that our current RTAP model exceeds our previous vendors with more than twice the gain, giving us decreased costs as we switch from outside vendors to in-house processing. We also need to score structural entities like institutions such as high schools, community colleges, universities, as well as geographic areas, zip codes, counties, states, nations, so that we can identify, rank, and target high-yield institutions and locations. Treating these as customers, this ranking is often done via an RFM analysis, in which we rank customers on three dimensions of how recent they've been to our store, how often they visit the store, and how much money they spent. For WSU, we modified this approach, creating a 9-tile rank, giving us more granularity, and we place more weight on matriculation by moving it first into that dimension set. We also append the actual registration yield from the institution to the score to give us greater detail and to break ties. So as we can see, we now have, in addition to the student's individual probability of becoming an applicant, the RTAP score, we also have the institutional rank of the high school that they're in, the MFR score. As with the RTAP score, the SPS-generated MFR score is uploaded daily into Banner. While the scores can be used separately, our admission offices uses them in combination to target high-yield students within high-yield schools. For example, they may elect to target only schools that have a 30% or higher matriculation rate, and students who have a 40% or greater probability of becoming an applicant. Again, this reduces our recruitment costs while producing a higher yield of students. And this is just but a short example of how we deploy predictive analytics using IBM SPSS statistics as well as Modeler. Of course, I would be remiss to give the impression that our only focus is on getting as many students into WSU as we can. One of our top priorities is, of course, student success. So once a student enrolls, we have several scoring metrics created daily by SPSS that identify students who are at academic risk, from which advisors can take action to address at-risk students. For example, if we take a look at the incoming first-year students, we have scores and dynamic reports that identify at-risk behavior based on their admission data, such as their academic ability, their probability to be on academic probation their first year, or whether they have remedial course needs that have to be addressed. Once enrolled, We then have scoring that identifies at-risk students for failure to complete things such as basic skill courses, if they pre-registered for a course with a high DF grade distribution, if their current academic standing places them in jeopardy, and if they have ever had changes in their performance, such as a decrease in their GPA over time, or reduced enrollment hours, or intermittent terms. And of course, the significant changes that might occur in out-of-pocket education expenses. Again, like the RTAP and the MFR scores, these are created and refreshed daily by our SPSS and uploaded into our banner system, making them available to both advisors as well as staff. In fact, in the next slide, we take a look at a dynamic student at-risk report that we created from our banner data and the SPSS scoring that's available to that of the advisors. The expanded view shows a student with an SPS-generated academic ability score, which we call INC, of 21. And despite having an average ACT and high school GPA, we know that students who have an INC score under 25 are 3 times more likely to be on probation their first year. The blue shaded section, in fact, shows this student is on probation after completing 25 hours, just as we had predicted. Furthermore, we notice that the student has pre-registered for 3 high DF grade distribution classes, and they have not yet completed their basic skills math course. An advisor can now meet with a student before classes begin to advise them on redoing their schedule so they're better prepared to succeed before harm actually occurs to the student. In addition to both on recruitment as well as retention, we also do things on the budget side. We use SPSS to forecast future outcomes, for example, to plan for contingencies, as they may be related to resources. Here we see a graph forecasting the number of students who will be enrolled by our fall 20th Census Day and comparing it to past terms. The forecasting allows us to make it possible to intervene and take action to change future outcomes. For example, if our forecast showed a negative trend, we may change the allocation of freshman scholarships during the pre-fall registration cycle, thus generating more yield and affecting a change that we need to avoid an undesirable outcome. And of course, we can always take longer range views, in which case we can look at potential revenue shortfalls in the future in terms of long-range budget planning. As with recruitment and retention examples we've shared today, we have several budget-related deployments, including cost allocation modeling, accounts receivable risk, space utilization, to mention a few, all of which are produced by SPSS. So to recap, if we take a look at the area of retention, we've seen significant gains. In just the first 2 years, we saw a 27% increase in the number of students who matriculated to our institution. We were able to discontinue the vendors, which in the first year alone saved us over $65,000 that we were previously paying outside vendors to do this service and not reach the return on investment that we were getting. And of course, now that we have reduced the cost of recruitment, we can take those savings and divert them in other areas, such as better staffing, for example, to do different populations. On the retention side, we saw an increase of 70 to 74% in our retention rate just right after we began to do the analytics, because we were able to engage students who were at risk to encourage them to be able to fix the problems that they had so they could continue forward. And of course, that preemptive advising becomes very important because it can get to a student before they actually have more harm happen to them. On the budget side, we've been able to forecast revenue more appropriately in order to be able to plan, and that's allowed us also to be able to take preemptive action to actually change that future outcome. With that, I'm now going to turn it back to Shannon.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wright. We do have a few questions for you. The first is, how do you get your data from SPSS into your student information system, which I believe you said was Banner?
That's correct. In this case, what we're doing is we're uploading the scores because they really are nothing more than a real test score, and they're being uploaded into the SOAR test table within Banner. That makes it available for a large number of people on campus, both on the recruitment side as well as the advisor side. Now, how do we do that? Both in SPSS statistics as well as an SPSS modeler, you have the ability through an ODBC connection to be able to write to a database. In our case, we're using Oracle databases. So when we run our scripts, whether that be in the SPSS statistics or the SPSS modeler, We then push that data out into an Oracle table that then is pushed into the SOAR test table every night. Some of these processes, for example, with the SPSS modeler, we can do as bulk inserts, which allow us to be able to do large number of records in a very short period of time. So that's how we currently push our data from the SPSS side into that of our banner system.
We received another question. How close is your enrollment forecasting to actuals?
Well, as I always tell everybody, the forecast is right the day it's made. But of course, events always happen, and externalities we can't control. What we do in our modeling, since our forecast is ran every day, is we try to achieve a 1% variance in terms of what our prediction should be versus that of what it actually is. And as we go through the cycle of the registration process, for example, for fall, which is a 161-day period of time, it allows us to be able to make adjustments. A good example is that for this particular fall that we're in, we began to see that we were not going to make the numbers that we wanted to make. That gave us the opportunity about 2 weeks before classes began to have other classes come online that were going to target a group of in-service and professional students, which allowed us to be able to increase our enrollment yield so that we would be able to meet our targets. So again, the modeling for forecasting allows you to be able to have a smaller variance in terms of what you want it to be and only accept a model that will be within that range.
Thank you. Our next question, do you have a centralized modeling team, or is the work being handled by different groups across campus? And if centralized, what part of the organization does it report to?
We're rather unique in higher education in that we have a chief data officer, which is not common in higher ed, and more importantly, that chief data officer, which happens to be me at this point in time, actually is separate from IT. And the registrar office, admissions, and financial aid reports to me as chief data officer. That gives me the opportunity to be able to have input in what kind of data that we're using, the quality of that data, the coding, and the practices that take place. So that when we do things engaged in data, we're doing it in the hopes of being able to derive it as information that can be used for decision making. So in our case, we have a very centralized, but it's centralized on the academic side. IT provides support in being able to make sure that we have access to our information system and can have security measures to be able to guard against any damage.
We have another question. This question is, our school's enrollment size is 5,000. Do you feel a 1% variance could be achieved?
I would believe so. Again, that's going to be based on the quality of the data that's within your information system. And that is a key point because statistics, as well as modeling, is really dependent upon the quality of that data. If that data is of bad quality, then you're going to get bad models as well as bad results. And that normally takes a commitment at the institutional level. A good example is when we began in 2008, we began with the admission side. We cleaned up over 40,000 data entry errors just in that 1 year period alone. Since that time, we now have daily audits that run and allow the admissions office to correct those errors so that there are minimal errors that exist. But notice the commitment that had to be made to clean up that data. An admissions office is largely a transactional unit. For them, what happened last year is not important. They're really a forward-looking unit. But to get them to go back and clean up 5 years of data was a testament to the belief they had in being able to use analytics. And they did that. And as a result, we had good, pristine data to be able to make estimations from. So while it may sound simple, yes, you're going to buy this software, you're going to have a consultant, or you're going to have someone in your shop doing these models. They can't do it alone. It has to be an enterprise involvement that values transactional data that can be used for information, and that means cleaning up the information.
I believe that question leads us nicely into the next. What kind of data quality do you implement or use at Wichita State?
We use it based upon the area that we're involved in, and again, we went from the recruitment offices to that of the admission side, and we're now getting into about halfway through that on the financial side. We have a data governance committee, a data management committee that evaluates all data systems and data practices as well as data standards. That gives us some enforcement and being able to have at the institutional level the power to be able to change what people do, including auditing for that of data errors that have to be taken care of. So for us, it really has been a cultural change and one that's done from the top down.
Dr. Wright, are those audits automated? And if so, what tools are you using for that process?
Well, it just so happens we use SPSS. Because every night SPSS is going out and grabbing our information system, grabbing, for example, the admission data, and we've already been able to identify a series of common errors that might exist. And as a result, we can code and have SPSS check to see whether or not there is a column, for example, in a table that has a code that shouldn't be there in relationship to another column. Those are automated reports that come out every morning to the admissions office, and it will actually list the type of error and the type of record they have to go out and change. And then they've made a commitment to clean that up within 24 hours. So today, after we cleaned up those 40,000 data entry errors, we now have, on average, anywhere between 7 and 15 errors per day that come up, and those are cleaned up before the next day. So again, fully automated within the SPSS and Banner system.
We just got another question. How do your algorithms vary between undergraduate, graduate, doctoral, and non-traditional professional students?
That's going to be always dependent upon the population. And even within the ones that you just listed, there are many variances within those groups. Let's just deal with the undergraduate, for example. We have high school seniors. We have high school seniors who are stop-outs, meaning that they did not go to college immediately after high school. We have returning adults. We have transfer students. We have non-degree students. Each of those requires a different algorithm, partly because of the fact they have different data elements available. For example, in the high school seniors, we have pretty complete test score data. But by the time we move into a returning adult or a transfer student, we're more limited on what test scores are available in order to be able to train a model. So each of those populations have to have a different algorithm in order to accurately be able to predict.
And I think we have time for one more question. What kind of background or education does someone need to get into the field of predictive analytics or to use SPSS?
I'm going to let John answer that question.
Okay, let me take this. So I think there's some keys and some nice to have. So I think intellectual curiosity is certainly a key, along with ability and desire to dig in and understand the data that's available. Ability to work across the organization, and then along with it, kind of in terms of foundation, some understanding of statistics and some SQL skills. Those would be important elements.
Well, thank you both to John Murphy and Dr. Wright for those answers. I'm going to have Mike Tagtoe start our closing.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. And thanks so much, Dr. Wright and John. That was very compelling. So I wanted to talk about just a couple of next steps. First of all, the session today, hopefully you enjoyed hearing about the benefits that Wichita State has enjoyed in the areas of recruitment, retention, and budgeting and planning. The 27% increase in admissions and the 4% improvement in retention for freshmen was very interesting to hear about, and hope you enjoyed that as well. I wanted to remind you that we have a seminar series. This is our first, and looks like you got a star for attending today's series. The next one is October 23rd, budgeting and planning, and we'll be sending out invitations to you in the next couple weeks on that, and then followed by business analytics and data integration, data cleansing, and demystifying Banner. And finally, as you could tell today, we were only able to talk about the technologies and the benefits of implementing these technologies, but weren't able to show a live demonstration. So as a next step, if you're interested, and oftentimes people are, we'd be happy to pull together a higher ed solution for you, a solution demonstration for you. And to do that, just reach out to me. You have my contact information on the right side of the slide, Mike Tagtoe, and happy to make arrangements and show you the technology that leads to some of the benefits that you heard about today. With that, wanted to thank everybody for their time, and I'll turn it back over to Shannon.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to Dr. Wright and John Murphy for presenting on predictive analytics in higher education for us today. Thank you to all of you for attending. We hope you found this workshop a good value of your time. As Mike mentioned, we will be hosting more workshops like these in the future. Our next topic will be budgeting and planning in higher education, which will be held on October 23rd, and we hope you'll watch out for an invitation soon. The slide deck from today's presentation will be made available on our website. I will follow up with an email to everyone who registered for today's workshop with a link to this site. Thank you again. This workshop is now ending.